John Giblett, it's a real pleasure to have a chat with you today about your career, and particularly your career in sailing, which is one of the most exciting stories to be told. So let's start more or less at the beginning then. You went to Holbrook.
Oh, I did, yes.
Tell me how you ended up there. And
well, I was a local lagging firm, and a friend of mine was going to Holbrook. I said, what's that? So he said, well, if your dad's in the Navy, you can go. And your dad's in the RAF, you can't go. Well, Dad was in the Royal Marine Light Infantry. So I could go, and I did. And I went to Holbrook in September 1946, and I stayed there till 1951. And we had a lot to do with boats on the store, learning seamanship, navigation, and all that sort of thing. In fact, at Holbrook, we were destined really to join the Navy.
Did you sail before that when you were at Fareham? When you were at home?
No, I messed about a little bit in Fareham Creek.
Yeah.
Can't remember anything under sail though.
No, okay. So Holbrook was where it. And did that light the blue touch paper, so to speak, for you?
Oh yeah, and reading books about square riggers like Percy F. Westerman books, things like that. I wanted to go to sea.
Right.
That's what I needed to do.
Yeah. But of course you weren't going to go to sea and sailing ships, were you? Even by even in the early 50s we had.
That's right.
So when did you first start doing sort of Navy sailing then?
Yeah, quite late. I mean, I joined the Navy in '51, and there was some time, I think it was more in the '60s, when I was at HMS Dryad, and they had trouble with their yacht.
You were a sparker.
Yeah, I was greenie. Yeah, I joined as a greenie,
right.
And I did the mech course eventually.
Right.
And
so what were you doing at Dryad?
Maintaining the kit? Yeah, I was looking after gyro compasses, plotting tables.
Right.
And I was in the workshops, and they came in one day and said, could you have a look at our engine on Planet? And then Jim Salderstall joined, and he wanted to race Planet.
So Planet was the pioneer, the Van der Stapp designed.
30 footer.
Where was she? Was she here? Was she at Hornet, or was she up at Excellent?
No, she was at Excellent.
Right.
And I think we brought her here a few times. And then Jim, who was sailing bosuns, he got me in the crew of the bosuns, and I did a few bosun races with him, which was quite fun with Jim, because we were lying second, and he called out to the first and said, my name's Jim Saltonstall, I always win, come back, you know. And we won, you know. And then with the Planet and a few RNSA races, I guess I got the bug, you know.
Yeah. And your tickets, where did you get your tickets, early tickets from?
Well, my tickets came a bit later than that, because I went to Hong Kong as the gyro compass EA and played a lot of water polo. And I ran the water polo, and we had civilian guys playing with us. And one day, one of the guys, Peter Jolly, he said to me, my boss on his yacht, he can't get a crew. And I jumped in and said, I'll do that. And I crewed for Bill Turnbull on his SNS, Seal. And then after a while, it was my 2 years are up, and I came back to UK and went to the Nautical College to do the RYA courses. And subsequently, Bill Turnbull brought his boat over to be part of the Hong Kong Admiral's Cup team in '75, and he said to John Oakley, find this guy John Giblett, because I want him on my boat. And I became a member of the Hong Kong Admiral's Cup team. And
in which year did you race?
1975.
Right, okay.
And so I was racing, in fact, daft it sounds, I guess I basically went from sort of the third division to the first division, sort of straight away. And I was racing with some really, really top guys, especially Jono. And me and Jono got on well, and I basically run the boat, run the victuals, run everything, drove the coffee grinder. I was pretty fit. And I was 40, you know. But I was in the top flight of sailing.
And so you've done some sailing with some establishment yacht sailing as well.
Yes, I have, yeah.
But leading up to that, though.
Yeah, leading up to that. And then my career, 22 years in the electrical branch of the Royal Navy, was coming to a close. And they then started advertising for skippers here at the Joint Service Sailing Centre.
Right.
For the next 55s. I put in, and luckily
because you had
enough,
your tickets, because you'd got your ticket.
luckily enough, I came here, and they gave me.
So how did that fit around Seal then and the Hong Kong Admiral's Cup crowd?
Well, that was basically.
Which came first?
Seal.
Right. Okay.
Seal came first.
Right.
And I did quite a lot of racing with John Oakley, and he had a real good yacht, Vanguard, and Vanguard came in more or less the same time as I came here in '76.
Okay.
January '76, I joined here with Terry Nash.
Oh, did you?
Me and Terry joined on the Sunday. He was given Racer,
right,
and I was given a brand new Nuke 55 called Dasher.
Well, there's a thing. She's not looking bad. Have you seen her? Since they haven't quite finished the refit, have they? But
yeah,
she should be ready for.
What is nice is that she's still here.
Yeah.
And
so
the rest are gone. Yeah, and I'm still here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Some longevity here there. That's a nice thing. Yeah. Don't quite know how she ended up being the one that stayed, but she probably.
Because she was well looked after.
She was well looked after, my dear chap. Obvious. I don't know why I asked that question. Oh, right, okay. So you spent time with Hong Kong Mary's Cup, came here, Dasher, and had some good adventures with her. I think you did some tall ships racing and that sort of thing.
Yeah, Dasher. In those 3 years, in '76, '77, '78, I did a few races with her. And then during that time, I did the second Whitbread.
Yeah.
On adventure, so that was in '77, '78. So
was that run very? I mean, the first Whitbread with adventure. One of the things that sort of emerges was how well prepared they were.
Yeah.
They did a lot. They did a year's worth of training, and of course the boat was new, and you got the impression that no stone was left unturned in the preparation of that boat. What was it like the second time around?
Yeah, I think what you've just said is you have to mention Roy Mullender. Chief Roy Mullender was the coach, and he prepared not only the crew, the yacht, and I tried to sort of do what he did, and I didn't have a lot of input to adventure for the second race until I joined her in Auckland. And we found things in Auckland on her that we had to put right. For instance, I got rid of the wire spinnaker halliards. They were causing trouble at the top of the mast. We had all that fixed, and I fitted rope spinnaker halliards, easier to handle. Much
Presumably you had to put new sheaves in, did you? And all that sort
of no, the sheaves were
okay.
Yeah, the sheaves. Yeah, I think we did. I think you're right. Yeah, well, we re-sheathed her so that would take a rope, and we did all that in Auckland, and we did a lot of preparation. Had her out in the water, and we had 10 crew. Right. We didn't have 12. We had 10 crew, and it was a joint service crew, and we had a good crew. Yeah. Ian Bailey Wilmot was our skipper.
Right.
And then those, of course, you had to get the sextant out, find out where you were. And that was around the Horn leg. And it was...
Was that your first Cape Horn rounding?
Yeah, that was my first Cape Horn rounding. And I was the mate of the boat. And I have to say, it was a good trip, but it was rough. Down there, with a Nick 55, your 24-hour run would be, if you're lucky, probably 220. So it was gonna take a fair old time, and we had a lot of trouble. One of the biggest problems we had, we had a leak, and we used to pump out quite a lot, and then the whole salt water got into the starting circuits of the engine. We couldn't start the engine. We couldn't start the engine, we couldn't charge the batteries. And therefore we had a trouble trying to communicate.
A bit like you had an electrical shop on board then.
And so I said to William, well, I'll take the starter off and rebuild bits in the starter, put it all back. The engineer, Pony Moore, who was an engineer, a chief in the Navy, he got the engine all ready to go, you know. And we had no switches or anything, so I just connected one cable to the negative side of the battery, big pair of Pusser's red handle pliers, and banged it on and away it went. Away it went, and that's how we started it ever since. You know. And so we could charge the batteries, run the engine, and have hot food, because we had a generator, but it was driven by gas.
Oh, really?
So if you used the gas on the generator, you couldn't use it to cook your food. And so that's it.
Right, so it was electricity or hot food, but not both.
Yeah.
Right.
We had quite a lot of problems on there. The worst problem we did have was when we got knocked over. We'd been round the horn, and then things were getting dark. You know, we were a little darker, and we hit the tail end of a huge storm, and I was in my bunk, and the guys on deck. All of a sudden, there was it was like we'd been hit by a lorry, and the boat went over about 110 degrees, top of the mast in the water, stayed there for a little while, not very long, and the mainsail split, and up we come. But what happened was that the wave hit the hatch, opened the hatch, and the whole wave went straight into the skipper's bunk, who was in there. We had to get him out. He was drowning in his bunk. And the guy on the helm, the RAF man on the helm, a skilly, it hit him in the chest, and it knocked him off the helm straight into the pulpit. And if it hadn't been harnessed on, we'd have lost him. And it actually ripped his jacket open. And we lost everything. All man overboard gear went, all the winch handles went, and even the winch box beside the mast that was screwed down with the stainless steel brackets, that disappeared as well. It was quite bad. I went and got the trysail, and Ian wouldn't let me put it up. He said, no, he said, we'll just have to wait till tomorrow. And then the army guys said, what are we going to do? And the cooker had come out, so we put that back, put the kettle on, and had a cup of tea. You know.
As you do.
As you do, yeah.
Never go to sea in a boat where you can't make tea, I've always said.
But we got to Rio, but it took us 44 days from Auckland to Rio. As you know, today they can do that in about 18 days.
Yeah.
But it was great. The whole thing was a great experience, yeah.
Did you get off in Rio, or did you bring it home as well? Or?
No, we changed crews in every port. So when we got to Rio, I didn't actually finish with the yacht, and somebody took over, and the committee put us on a plane and sent us home. I arrived, and they said, "What are you doing in UK? You're supposed to stay back in Rio and help put it all together."
All right.
But I didn't go back, and so yeah.
Okay. Crikey. After that, so then when did you finish in at Joint Service? Because we're now into pretty much into the 80s.
What happened then? I was finishing my 3 years in January '79, and Sir John Oakley wanted me to be project manager, run the crew of the new 12-metre America's Cup Challenge on the 12-metre line. And I thought, well, this is a good career. And so I left. The commander here, Commander Alan Williams, was a bit upset. He said, "You're one of my skippers, you can't leave it." And I left to join the America's Cup, which I think was going with that. The boat hadn't been launched, so I had to get her launched. It was being built in Southampton by the George brothers, in aluminium, beautiful, beautiful boat. And we got the keel sorted, got it up from Cornwall where it was made, got it all fitted, and eventually got it launched. And I didn't actually race on the boat. I had the powerboat, so I used to go out and tow her in and help train the crew, get the clothing for the crew, all that sort of thing. And then we had a chance to go to Marstrand in Sweden to race against the Sverige, the Pelly Pedersen's 12 metre. And we didn't have a lot of money, so they asked me to sail it there. And I think I'm probably the only skipper who sailed a racing 12 across the North Sea to Marstrand and back. And when I sailed her back, we had to heave to.
They're not really designed for that sort of weather, are they?
No, it's not, no. And people said, how did you sleep? What we decided to do was get hammocks from the Navy. And one of the crew was Tomo, and he lives in Stubbington, but he used to run the Fleet Air Arm yachts, the Twister they had.
Yeah.
And he worked here, and he was a good man. And I got him to get some hammocks. So that's all we had down below were 4 hammocks and a cooker and some food and a radio. That's about it, all we had. And the boat was sealed up, so we made water, but not too bad. Yeah. And I sailed her there and back, yeah. Sure.
What happened to the campaign?
Well, the campaign was short of money.
Right.
And the army came up with a good idea, so we could let you have a sergeant who could run the thing, so you don't have to pay John Giblett, you know.
Oh, I see.
And so I was made redundant, and daft it sounds, it's the best thing that happened. Because shortly after that, Ian Boney Wilmot, who was my skipper on the Round the Horn leg, he started the project with the 81 Whitbread race, and he wanted me with him.
Right.
And the RN said that I could come back. And I was about to come back when the race was cancelled. They still wanted me back to go and renovate and bring back the sailing in HMS Collingwood. So I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. So I went back into Collingwood as a chief and took over the Electron, the Norlin 34. And with that, I had bags of experience, and I had good bosses in there. And
so was it part of the syllabus in those days? Were they sailing? Was Collingwood sailing? Were trainees sent sailing, or was it pretty much?
Yes, there was a few things going on. I did some of the trainees there. Some of the midshipmen they wanted to know about how to take a sight, you know, do sun sights, and I went into the classroom once and talked to them all, you know, showed them how to do that, and they wanted to know what it was like doing the round the world race. So I had a couple of days in the classroom with them, and I think they thoroughly enjoyed it. But the actual sailing side of it, a lot of racing, and also taking all sorts of people out, ratings, RNS officers, making sure that they all had a go at sailing. And on a Wednesday, well, sports afternoon, I would take some of them out in the Southern sailing, yeah.
Because, of course, Sultan always had it as part of the syllabus, didn't they?
Yeah.
And for many years, Sultan were running boats and giving people sea sense training. But of course, Collingwood never quite, in my experience, Collingwood didn't embrace it in quite the same way. It used to send people off into the mountains.
No, but when I took over, the boat needed good refit, which I did. I got her into the big sheds in HMS Sultan. And while I was in there, I had a chippy come and help me, so he fitted out the galley, and I sorted the hull out, made it nice and smooth, painted it, took the mast out, got the mast out here at Hornet, put her in a shed, and started to make her into a really good racing boat. I had a lot of contacts in the in Hamble and in the Royal Racing, and I managed to get good winches at a fair price and redone them, and made her into quite a fast race boat.
Well, you did quite well with it, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. I've got some,
I think here's something I brought earlier.
yeah, I've got some of the medals I won. I think there's 7 there that I won with Electron.
Oh, all Rourke.
Yeah, they're all Rourke.
Yeah, Rourke racing.
Yeah.
All Rourke.
We did all the Rourke races, including the Fastnet.
Right. Yeah.
And in the Fastnet, it was the 1981 was the first Fastnet I did on her.
Right.
And we won the Gold Rose Trophy, which was put up after the 79 disaster. And I won that in 81, and we won every RNSA trophy. So we were top RNSA boat. And then it went on for 3 years for me, and in 82, 83 we won the Gold Rose Trophy in the Fastnet again. And in September 83, they couldn't hold me any longer as the bosun of a 30-foot yacht. And so they said, you can sign on, but you have to go back to joint services.
Right.
So in 83, September 83, I rejoined Joint Service Saturday as a skipper.
Right.
And they were used to me anyway, so.
Yeah.
So I
Back with the Knicks or?
Mainly back with the Nicholsons, and did quite a lot of work actually. I think one of the most memorable races I did was in '84, and I flew out to Bermuda with the crew to take over Dasher, my old yacht, to do the tall ships race to Nova Scotia, and that was the race where the Marquesa sank. The tall ship Marquesa, she lost 18 souls there. Yeah. We had a really good race. The weather was just right.
A big change, didn't it, in safety at sea?
That's right.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
It was a seminal.
But in that race, we finished in Nova Scotia. We were the only yacht to finish on the correct time.
Right.
And
where'd you go into Halifax or?
Yeah, we went to Halifax. Yeah, and I could tell quite a funny story actually, because I had a guy who was a communicator, and he had the radio on, and he got a call, and the guys chatted to him, and then said, "Can we talk to your skipper?" So, I thought, yeah, okay, it's on the VHF, so I went down there, and he said, "You're the skipper of Dasher. You've just won the race. Is there anything you could do when you get ashore?" And I said, "Yeah, we could do with a hot bath, a hot meal, and maybe a hot woman." What I didn't know, it was going all over Canada.
Oh lordy!
Yeah, so I was a very popular man when we got in. Yeah, there was one problem I had though. Shortly just before we got in, I completely lost my voice. Completely lost it. And we were well looked after in Halifax. And then what we did then, we actually won 7 prizes. And the committee were getting a little bit worried because who else was going to get anything? And so they had to bring the finishing line a little bit nearer to the other yachts. And then we had to take the boat to Gaspé, because this is what the race was about. It was the finding of Gaspé in years before.
Right.
And we went to Gaspé and anchored there, and the Russian big square rigger, the cruising stern, who always wins all the races, and the skipper was known as Bill, and he sent for me. And he took me into the great cabin, and he said, "I don't understand this," he said, "and the small yacht wins the race. I always win." And he fed me vodka and everything, I had a lovely time with it. And then he sent me back. And then from there we took the boat to Quebec.
Right.
and we had good dinners there, and it was a fantastic.
What a great deployment. Did you bring her home as well? Or
no. I flew back on the Dutch Airways, and as I went up, the commander who was with me, really nice guy, I noticed he was getting quite close to me, and we went out, as we went into the airplane, the stewardess said, you're John Giblett, aren't you? She said, oh, you're in first class. Would you like to take somebody with you? And I said, well, yes.
Yeah, fair enough.
So we've flown back first class. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, the high life, John. Oh, yeah.
It was really, really good. Yeah.
So was that the highlight of that particular joint services tour for you then, probably?
Well, that was a great time, I must admit. Shortly after that, I think it was 1987, the RNSA wanted to do the 89-90 Whitbread race. And Commander Johnson and his wife and me formed a project at Joint Services over in Gunboat Yard in one of the offices there. And we didn't know what to do, quite honestly. And what we had to do was find a yacht. So we were chatting one day and I said, well, look, I'll go over to Hood Sales to see my mate John Shannon, who's running Hoods, and I'll get a price. So how much Maxi cost of sales will send us, you know. So off I went on my own, you know, and John Shannon knew me, and I called in at Hoods. And John Shannon said, what can I do for you? I said, well, can you tell me how much a suit of sales would cost them actually to do the Whitbread? No problems, he said. And he told me, I wrote it all down. And he said, what boat have you got? And I said, well, we haven't got one. He said, what are you looking for? I said, well, Maxi, really. Come with me, he said, and took me to see Bill Green, the Canadian yacht builder. And in his shed, upside down, he had this huge Maxi.
Oh, Fasisi, wasn't it? Was it Fasisi?
No.
Oh,
and
sorry.
This yacht, it was being built by Klaus Hebben, but he pulled away from it because of the 1986 stock market crash.
Right.
And I had the portfolio from the RNSA showing, you know, what the Navy could do and everything. And Bill Green looked at it. He said, I'm just about to sack all my guys. I've got no money to finish the yacht. If you can get it built, he said, I owe you everything. And that evening at home, I was reading the Motorsport, and I saw an advert in there by an ex-Formula One racing driver called Guy Edwards. A lot of people will remember Guy Edwards because in the German Grand Prix of 1976, Niki Lauda crashed and his car was in flames, and Guy Edwards stopped his car, ran across the track to help put him out with other drivers, and he got the Queen's Gallantry Medal for that effort. And Guy became known as Mr. Sponsorship. He put tobacco with cars, and in it, the advert, he said he could do it with yachts as well. So I came in to Commander Johnson, and I said, look what I found, let's get him down here. And the next day he was down here in his jack. I took him around to the Submarine Museum, I took him to the Naval Museum in the dockyard, and he said, I can get no problems with you guys. And the next thing he got was Rothmans. And we had Rothmans. They said, yeah, well, you know, they'll do it. Unfortunately, of course, the political route, tobacco, no, you can't have it. And the Admiral Woodward, the Falklands Admiral, he became involved. And we had,
he was Commodore of RNSA, wasn't he?
Yeah, we had a letter of intent with Guy Edwards. I mean, he wasn't going to do it for nothing.
No.
And shortly, what actually happened was Klaus Hebben suddenly said, I'll build the yacht, I'll put the money in if you crew it for now. And Guy Edwards said, well, where's my 30,000? You know, Klaus said, well, I'm not paying you. And we couldn't touch it. We had to drop the project. And the only person who wasn't told was me.
Right.
And I got a phone call from Rear Admiral Williams. Said, do you know what's happened? I said, no. He said, nobody's told you. I said, no. He said, well, you've lost the project. And the Army picked it up, and a few months later, they made it joint service, and the one guy they wouldn't let go was me. Right. They wanted me to run the boat.
And what happened to Edwards in the meantime?
Guy Edwards just went away.
So he got his 30k and went, did he?
Well, no, he didn't get paid. No, he didn't get any money. Close wouldn't pay him, and our contract finished with him. Right. And he went away. I was very sad about that, and I've never been able to find him. Right. I know he lives in Ireland now. Right. A guy. It was really nice. He did a lot of work for us, you know. And anyway.
So it changed its hue then, if it turned into a joint services project.
Yeah. It went joint service. Yeah. And some of our guys decided to pull out, which was a bit sad. And then the build went ahead. The RAF put a few guys down there to help, which wasn't a good idea. And then they eventually finished the boat. Klaus finished the boat. We brought it round to Moody's to finish her off. Put the mast in and put it all together. I was doing using the NIC 55s. Training the crew, trying to select crew, and I found some really good sailors, but they never got a look in, unfortunately. A bit disappointing, the whole project.
Why was that? Somebody else picked the crew in the end, or?
Well, I mean, I've got to be careful what I say, really, but I mean, it's, as you know, with joint service sailing, it has to be looked at as a training thing as well.
Yes, of course.
And so some of the younger officers were put in. Some of the guys were put in who were not racing guys. And anyway, to basically cut a long story short, we launched her. We did I was not on the boat. And Colonel Frank Essen was the skipper. He wasn't a racing skipper, but what he was a real good leader. He was a really great guy. And we also had Chris Freer, who was the owner's rep, who was causing us quite a lot of grief. And anyway, we eventually got to Punta del Este, and all hell let loose there. Frank was asked to go, and Commander Colin Watkins was made skipper. And Colin said he wanted me back on the boat because I've been in the Southern Ocean. And so they put me back for the Southern Ocean legs as a heavy weather helmsman. That's what they said. Yeah. And yeah, I mean the boat was okay. We had a lot of problems. One thing Peter Blake said to us, he said, "Well, at least you haven't killed anybody."
Well, yeah. So mechanical failures, or
yeah, we had a few problems on the boat. We had a few problems with crew. Right. Some crews had to go. Peter Blake couldn't understand on the last leg why I had to go. And he said to Colin, "Why are you getting your best guy out?" You know, but I had to come home because we had to change some of the crew.
Because that was the policy. And
we also had the owner's skipper on the boat as well. Really great seaman, great racing guy. Serge was a great guy. It was disappointing for me really because I expected, if it was an RN thing, that I would probably skipper some of the legs, and we didn't really get her going up to speed, if you like. You know, it was a short time as well. But anyway, they got it round. Unfortunately, in the last leg, I didn't go to Fort Lauderdale, and the Brigadier Notley went out there, wanted to know where I was, and luckily I had nothing to do with the boat, and on the way back, she lost her rig. So she arrived in Hamble with half the mast gone. And I thought, well, nothing to do with Giblett. Yeah.
When did you get your own boat? Because I know you've got a twister now. So,
Yeah, what happened shortly after the race, 1990, in July, I had to leave the Navy. I was 55 and a half. As you know, 55, I should have gone.
Yeah.
So 55 and a half, I got my discharge and off I went. And I went out to the Med to do some professional skippering on a big maxi cruising yacht. And then I came back and I started looking after Terry Robinson's yacht, Assuage. And a few years after that, he decided to buy a brand new Swan 48. Asked me to be his permanent skipper, which I thought, great, yeah, I'm running out of the handle. And that was good. And the good thing about that was that we entered her in the 1997 Swan European Championship in Cowes, and we won it. Not only did we win the Rolex race, we won the overall event. And we won 2 Rolex watches.
There's one.
And one of them, the Submariner, I was presented.
Fantastic.
And I spent 6 years with them. Absolutely lovely time.
Yeah.
Lovely time. And then I was 65. Terry always retired people at 65. So he said to me, you know, I think you ought to go. What he didn't tell me, he was selling the boat. And the next thing, the Russians bought a Swan 48. And I went, the Swan people said, go and have a chat with them, and I took them over to the Red Funnel Regatta. They had a great time and wanted me to stay with them. But at the same time, I bought my own boat because I thought I was finished. Mm-hmm. So I bought a Holman and Pye Sterling, a classic wooden boat, which is in pretty good nick. Unfortunately, of course, I couldn't sail it very much, and I spent 6 years with the Russians, did the Atlantic race, which we won, and I won some trophies because I was the oldest skipper on the finishing boat, you know, and all this sort of thing. And we did Antigua Race Week, and I managed to get some RNSA guys on there. A lot of them used to sail on the Assuage, and I got them on to Mercer. And so I spent 6 years with Mercer, and then I thought it was time I retired. But that didn't work either, because next thing I knew, I was asked by Michael O'Donnell, would I run his 42-foot Nimbus powerboat? Which I did that for about 2 years.
That's a gentleman yachtsman sort of turns to power. He buys himself a Nimbus, so it was probably...
So I had a good time with the man. He was a great guy. Yeah. You know, and he had one of the kill boats over in Cowes, which we used to race at. And I was still examining. I was examining, doing Yacht Masters and Oceans. And 2018, I decided I would retire from that as well. And I think 2018 was when I basically put my sailing boots up.
Right.
But
you still got the Sterling? I've
still got the Sterling. Yeah, I've got a lot of work to do on it. I haven't been able to, what with problems at home and things like that. My wife unfortunately broke her hip, so I haven't been able to do big time on it. Not only that, the weather hasn't been very good.
It's been shocking, hasn't it?
So I've got a bit of work to do on her, and then hopefully I should do some more sailing on her. But I have got an inkling that I might have to sell and let her go.
I don't think to do it somehow. I think you're probably you're one of those guys. You will fall off the back of it one day.
We also must appreciate that in 7 months' time I'm 90 years of age.
I think that's remarkable. You're as fit as a fiddle, mate.
I do a lot of fitness. Yeah. I do weight training.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated because there are so many different stories of people, and here you are, 89 and a half, and you are fit, you are strong, and I put it down to a life at sea, a life well led. You've had adventures, you've followed them, you've been surrounded by good people. What do you think is the secret to a long life of the sort that you have had, which is that's an extraordinary story.
I suppose.
And you look about 50, mate.
Well, I put it down to I come from a family that are quite long livers, and so maybe I picked up some good genes, you know. My dad was 94. Unfortunately, he had cancer, you know, which can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
And when he died, the sister in the hospital said to me, "Your dad was as fit as a fiddle. It was the cancer that killed him." My cousin, same family, my cousin in Adelaide, she was over 100. My great aunt was a couple of months off 100 when she fell over in the kitchen. And so I guess I've been lucky with that.
Sounds to me like you need to get that boat sorted then, because there's a bit more to do.
But I've looked after myself, I think. I've always tried to. I've never smoked.
Right.
I'm not a big drinker. My father was, you know, only beer, my dad was beer. And I reckon I've had a good life.
You've done really
and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it started well. Yeah. And don't forget that I was a youngster. I was 5 when the war started. And I can remember the Blitz of Coventry. I was there. My dad was in an RAF station. I was there. And we came out of the shelter in Coventry just after the Blitz, and my dad held my hand. And he was stepping on the sentry bombs, putting them out with his feet. And I remember that. Yeah. But, I suppose, don't forget, when I was 18 months old, I was on a troop ship going to Aden with my mum to join my dad in Aden, who was in the RAF there. And he did a lot of boxing. He was a good boxer, my dad. So he was a fit man. And I got some lovely photographs of the black native guys, you know, holding me in their arms, you know, walking around with me. And my mother always told me that my first language was Arabic, because they were all with me, always talking to me all the time, you know. So, yeah, good old life, really.
Brilliant. John, thank you very much for sharing it with us. It's a fascinating story and a great example of
thanks very much.
How the Navy and how people can combine to achieve remarkable things. Good luck to you. And
some people like Mickey Broughton, you know. Mickey.
Yeah, I know well.
Mickey, if you ask, you said, "Oh, John's just Navy." He's Navy as well. Went to a Navy school. Yeah. Joined the Navy. Yeah. I didn't know anything else but the Navy, you know, and sailing.
Yeah. Well, you haven't turned out too bad.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome to Hornet Services Sailing Club. Today I'm going to have a chat with Michael. Now, Michael's father was one of the founding members of Hornet. So let's bring him in. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
I'm pleased you're here as well. Looking forward to hearing about your dad and how it was when you were around when he set the club up. So if you can tell us a little bit about your upbringing and the association that you had with your father at Hornet.
Okay, I mean, just a little bit prior to that, of course, my father, whenever he went anywhere in the Navy during the Second World War and on exchange leave here in Sydney in 1959-60, his two passions he carried with him were sailing and rugby union. In Australia here in 59-60, he sailed from the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron and also from RNSA, the Naval Association here in Sydney. So he's very proud to sail here and enjoys sailing here. When we came back to England in the early 60s, my father was posted down to Leon Solent, and of course he then took his love to establishing Hornet with a group of others. And as a 9-year-old boy then, excuse me, I was always fascinated with sailing. I loved it from the stories and the information from his grandfather, from my grandfather, his father. And being in Sydney, then coming back and being there, I went for my first sail in a Navy sailing dinghy, a whaler, I think, in 1964. And I knew very much of my father's involvement. I went to the Hornet a couple of times as a child. My mother went to the dedication in July 64 with the pram. I wasn't there. I think I was probably babysat it or looked after at the time. But I remember going on Taranto and all the press and everything that was involved with Taranto, which was a go fast, 32-footer in those days, the Nicholson 32, and they won the Queen's Cup in that. So my memories of the Hornet are really is the time when I was more aware of sailing. It was the time I first started sailing, and it's commenced my love of sailing, which I carry through today. I've been involved with a lot of sailing, which I'll talk about soon.
Wow. So right from the very, very start of when the club was set up, although you weren't there on the inaugural day, your mother was, and has she told you about it? Have they explained what went on that day? Who was the guest of honour?
Look, my mother hasn't said too much about it. She obviously recalls being there, and I suppose one of the funny things was we were looking for photos of my younger sister. A lot of them were taken of me and my brother and sister, but the younger sister, who was 7 years old, younger than me, hardly any of them. But actually there was a few taken at that dedication. So my mother kept those shots of her in the pram, although you couldn't see her. So, look, my mother talks fondly of that time and my father's passion for establishing sailing as a sport wherever he went, and particularly there at the Hornet. So my mother has got those memories, and of course of my father going away sailing each weekend, just like I do. So from that point of view, I suppose that's more the taking of my mother. As I said, Richard Smeaton, who was an admiral at Leon Solent with my father, I remember fondly, and a number of the other naval officers that were good friends of my father through the Fleet Air Arm and times, and sailing of their yachts around that area. But so that's really my memory, and from what my mother's told me. But it was a good time and, an exciting time.
Yeah. So from your perspective then, so you first got to do a little bit of sailing at Hornet, and then what did that lead on to?
Well, I suppose when we emigrated to Australia, we bought a Heron dinghy when I was about 14 or 15, and I raced that and won some schools championships. My father then, would you believe, went overseas in 73, 74 and found this little dinghy called a laser. And he thought it might be a good boat for the future. Well, how right was he when he died in 74? But I got my first laser in 1974, and I raced them for 20 years, and that became a boat that I competed in very successfully. I competed in South Australia, in Sydney. I established a laser club in Sydney called Middle Harbour Amateur Sailing Club. When I was Commodore there, we had I was part of a very, very strong laser fleet where we did well at state level, nationals. And Glenn Burke, the 3-time world laser champion, a very good friend of mine, we mentored him through that club, and he was also an Australian Olympic rep in fins. But he was probably one of the best laser sailors of all time. From that, I did well and travelled overseas, and I got second in a Laser World Masters in New Bedford in the US in the 90s. So I've competed at a high level there. Then as I had my children, competed in tasers and out of the other boats. And recently, since the 90s, I crewed on and now skippering in Etchells. And I've been a member of the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron, like my father. And I'm now on the General Sailing Committee, and I'm just about to be fleet captain of the Etchells fleet in Sydney Harbour. And just recently had a very successful series or a season last season. So I'm club champion at the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron in the Etchells class. So I've been highly competitive in sailing all my time, and that stems from my father teaching me to sail. He loved it. I loved it, passionate about it. My kids have been brought up sailing. and my wife's had to put up with me sailing at regattas and sailing at weekends.
And of your wife, does she sail?
Look, she sails. We had a cruising boat for a little while, which I'd like to get another one. She loves being on the water, and as do my girls. I've got 4 girls. The eldest 2 are particularly good sailors and love sailing. One of them's got a little 25-foot yacht that she sails with a partner. So she does sail. But I think one of the biggest things for sailing is I've made so many good friends. A lot of quite well-known yachtsmen from, a lot of you probably don't realise, but in the America's Cup in '83, there were 3 key laser sailors there of my contemporaries. And Phil Smidmore, who was the mast man on Australia 2, was the one who spotted the wind shift that said to Bertrand and the team, come on, we need to jibe over here. And that's one of the reasons, of course, they won that race and we won the Cup. I race against John Bertrand a lot in the Etchells down here in Sydney. And Cole Beechel, who was on the boat, is an ex-Etchells world champion and Australian champion. I see a lot of them. And there's a lot of other famous guys that I've met growing up through lasers. I was lucky to be at the start and the growth of the laser class. I was chairman of the Laser Association as well here in Australia. So sailing's been terrific to me. I've loved the sport. It's a sport you can do all your life. And I'd love one day to come over there in England again and see the Hornet, see the club.
Well,
again.
I'm sure that you'll be most welcome at the club.
Oh, yeah. Looking forward to it sometime.
As for the rugby, so your dad was passionate about rugby as well.
Yeah.
Did he bring that from here?
He sure did, because he grew up at a boarding school before he joined the Navy, and he played fullback for their first and played for English schoolboys, I believe, against Wales, is the information I've got. And I suppose in 1938, because he was such a good sportsman and liked flying, he was recruited basically by the Fleet Air Arm, and hence he was in the Mediterranean when war broke out in 1939 on Swordfish. So his naval career started there, and he was actively flying for all 28 years he was in the Navy. So he flew everything from the Tiger Moth through to the Buccaneer. Some say he flew a Phantom at the end, but I'm not sure about that. But certainly he was very much involved with the jet age. He was in the Korean War as a squadron leader and other things. So that's quite an amazing background.
They gave him a fantastic background, and I'm almost sure that he would have had a flying boat.
That's right. Well, he was funny. He was passionate about hovercraft as well, because in the 60s they were very big in the Royal Navy, and he tried to establish a hovercraft passenger service here in Australia, which didn't happen because of the issues. I think with one of them there was an accident in the Channel, so that didn't happen. But I mean, from my point of view, I was very grateful growing up, loving father who, a huge, larger than life man who died too early, but left a lasting impression for all of us and got us all, to be self-reliant, resilient, and brought his passions of rugby and sailing to all of us. Now, my brothers like sailing in the water. We've all got that passion. So we're forever grateful for all of that.
And what other legacy do you think that your father has left?
Oh, look, I think from a number of point of view, I've written a story about my father, which I gave to Richard Farrington, who's got all the notes. I suppose he was always involved as a naval officer. He was very keen on always linking to local communities with rugby. He was a rugby referee, a first-grade referee as well. In fact, when he was in Australia in 59-60, he managed the Waratahs rugby team. He was vice president of Eastwood Rugby Club when he died here. He was involved with various Lions clubs and other things. And the schools I went to, he was very big in fundraising, supporting. He was very selfless, gave a lot back to the community, highly regarded. He was a straight conservative naval officer, well-liked, well-loved, a sense of humour. He was a great musician. A lot of people don't realise he wrote the official Fleet Air Arm March, which is still used today. And he wrote a few pop songs and actually put in a song when Australia at one stage was looking for a new national anthem, and his anthem got to the final. They didn't change the song, but I can remember growing up this very broad range of interests, loved to laugh, loved to joke, and lived life. So I think, in these times of today, which we're looking at today, and what he went through, was that resilience, that passion to do the right thing, to be on the right side of things and make a difference. And I think that's what he instilled in a lot of us.
And one of the key driving forces as well that set Hornet Services Sailing Club up, which was, we have to thank him for today. Without his drive, his friends and their ambition to set a club up at Hornet, having seen an opportunity, has left us with a fantastic legacy.
Oh, look, I agree. And as I've said to you before, I think sailing is an amazing sport. It's something you can do as a child right through to your end of life. I mean, there's one particular man at the squadron here who's 97 years of age still, Gordon Ingate, who people might know from Admiral's Cups teams from Australia and other things. And that's one of the great things of this sport. It's, from out in the environment, you've got to take on the environment, as we all know in yachting and sailing. It's you've certainly got to be competent and understand about your own capabilities in a pretty tough environment it can get. So that's one of the great things about this sport. You've got the freedom to do whatever you like out there, but you've got to manage it within the skills that you've got or understand how to do it all. And I think we need more of that for the youth of today and others to challenge themselves in this way rather than being bloody protected.
And have that respect for the sea.
Correct, absolutely.
I think that's the key. Have the respect and you can get away with it.
Correct. I agree with you totally. Yeah.
Well, Michael, that has been fascinating. Thank you very much for that insight into your father's legacy and what he did for the club back then. So hope you carry on with your career out there. I mean, you're obviously attached to the Royal Yacht Squadron. So do you fly that white ensign as well?
I've got the flag of the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron, but I mean, my father was very big on flags, and he could fly the white ensign. Only a few of them could here in Australia. He'd get very upset if people weren't flying the right flags, and rightly so. But no, it's amazing. So I mean, I'm very thankful to be here to be part of this and appreciate it. So thank you for having me along.
No, you are most welcome. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Welcome to Hornet Sailing Club. Today I've got Alison. So Alison's going to tell us about her sailing career. So Alison, how did you first get into sailing and at what age and where?
I was 12 and we lived in Fareham, and my parents had gone out and decided I was safe to be left at home on my own. So a friend and I walked down to Fareham Creek, found a boat in the bushes and got into it with a big pole, and then found ourselves stuck in the middle of Fareham Creek needing rescuing by the local fire brigade. So that was in about 1971, 72. So that was my first experience on my own in the water, which I just loved. And then when I was at school, the sixth form, we were allowed to play around in boats in the afternoon. And so I learned to sail from Langston Harbour, which was good. So that would have been about 16, 17 at the time. And then as soon as I joined the Navy, I just got into boats and dinghies and big boats as soon as possible.
Brilliant. And what was your first experience of sailing in the armed forces, and at what stage of your career and where?
So my very first experience was in an RAF yacht called Black Arrow, because my boyfriend was in the RAF at the time, and he said, well, we were in Scotland, I'm going down to Hornet for the weekend to sail, you can come if you want. So I came down and went sailing with him. So that was my first time in a big yacht, and by the time we got off the Needles, I was so seasick I was prone. However, they got us through in a 4-7 through the Needles. And then by about 5 o'clock, I was woken up and told, your watch now, off you go. Just keep land to the right and the wind in the sails. And I was absolutely hooked. That was just wonderful.
Even after all that sickness.
Yeah, well, it was fine. It'd gone by then. So that was RAF Black Arrow. I think they call it Red Arrow now, the RAF sailing yacht, don't they?
So that's a kill or cure.
Oh, yes, it was. Yeah, I still get seasick, but I love the sailing.
And where did that lead you to?
Trying to get as many weekends and holidays as I could, really, to do with sailing. So I then did a competent crew course pretty quickly. Down from here, and then I think I went off on a week's holiday with another couple of people in Fly Past of Cowley, which is another RAF yacht. So I think the chap was RAF, so I assume I wangled my way into that through the ex-boyfriend by this stage. And then did some more sailing up in Scotland when I was there. Did quite a bit, because I was based over in Rosyth. So a bit more in the dinghies there, and then once or twice on the bigger yachts that came up and wanted crew.
Aha. And when did you first sail out of Hornet? In a private boat, an establishment boat, regimental yacht, or with joint services?
I think it must have been joint services doing well, first of all, the RAF boat must have been owned by the RAF. So it would have then been joint services to do my competent crew.
Mm-hmm. And what experience and where did that experience take you?
Again, it gave me just so much confidence to join in anything. So whenever there was an opportunity through the DCIs or whatever that came round to join a yacht and a crew, I was first up there. So whenever I could.
And tell us a bit more about most memorable sailing events with the service or private racing or cruising.
I think one of probably the most memorable ones for me would be the Fastnet race of '79. The DCI came round and they were looking for crew for one of the Contessa's Explorer of Hornet. So I volunteered for that. Got a week off from Fishery Protection Squadron where I was working at the time, and went down to oh no, it wasn't the Fishery Protection Squadron, it was up in Petrevie, so it was underground. So it was great to get up top when we could. And then came down to here, and we took the boat across to Cowes and set off from there. So,
and that was a Contessa 32?
It was a Contessa 32,
and a 79 Fastnet?
Yes. Brilliant boats. Always
How
loved the
did you get
Contessas.
on?
Unfortunately, we had to retire. It was about the third day when the storm came in, so it was just before the storm came around Land's End, and it was before we got to Land's End, just before. We were reefing in on the main, and the reefing system on the Contessas then was a roller reefing, so it needed two of you at the mast. So I was up there actually on the handle, and another young chap on board was holding the halyard, and unfortunately didn't realise that the strength needed to hold on. So the reefing handle flew out of, when they let go, the reefing handle flew out of my hand straight into my eye.
Oh.
Knocked me back on the deck, and I lay there thinking, oh, I'm still alive. that's a good thing. But a voice from the cockpit said, don't move. I thought, that's fine, I'll just lie here. It's a good place to lie. But I could look up, and all I could see was the top of the mast and these huge grey waves all around us. That wasn't very pleasant. But luckily, our skipper at the time was a reservist, a lieutenant commander reservist, Noel Dilley. But he was a professor, surgeon at, I think it was Guy's Hospital in London. And so he just took one look at me and said, just, that's it, don't move. We'll carry on for a bit, see how it goes. But by this stage, he was concerned that my eye would fall out or something. So he called up the lifeguards, and the lifeboats were coming out because at this stage there were other problems, I think, around and about. We didn't know that at the time. And they tried to come alongside to take me off. But you can imagine in those big swells, one boat here, one boat's here.
Yeah.
And I think Noel eventually said politely, you'd better go somewhere else because we're turning round. So they took the decision to turn round. But jibing in that sort of sea and wind, because it was well over 4'7", nearly 4'8", in the Contessa, wasn't very pleasant. But it was okay, we got back, and I got dropped off at Penzance, and they brought the boat back, I think all the way to Hornet. And I spent a week in Falmouth Eye Hospital, and I was absolutely fine after that.
Wow.
So it was brilliant. But it was an experience, that Fastnet. So that's probably one of the main memories. But then another one, I'm sorry, it does involve the RAF again, was doing my day skipper's course. And one of the chaps on board was a RAF sergeant, and he didn't like the boat to Heale, and we were doing them in the Hurleys. And again, it was 4.6s and 4.7s, so he didn't like that very much. But he was absolutely brilliant at cooking crabs that we caught. So there it goes. That's another fond memory.
Brilliant. And how did you come to own your own boat?
When my children were a little bit older, I wanted desperately to get back into sailing. So I lived in the New Forest area at the time, and I went down to Lymington and found somebody with a Contessa and said, do you want some extra crew? Because the only boat I really knew that well was a Contessa, and he had a lovely Contessa, and he took me out racing. Well, I was part of the crew for racing on a Thursday night round the Cans. And then I did some XOD racing as well, which is dinghy racing from there. And that was a Wednesday afternoon. And then I just said, oh, I'd love to have my own boat. And the chap who owned the XOD said, if you got that itch, you got to scratch it. So the easiest way for me to do that was to join in a family, a third share on a gypsy. And that's when Nick and I really started our sailing together on this gypsy. And then we wanted to split up the three because one was going a different direction and the other one wanted their own boat as well. So we then bought our first boat, which was, Nick said, was our wedding present to ourselves. Sort of permanent honeymoon, really. And that was a Southerly 115.
And has she always been here at Hornet?
No, we were a bit homeless to start with because we weren't sure where to base her. And then luckily a space came up here and we were allowed to moor her here.
Bump straight in.
Straight in. And that was about a year after we'd had her and being bumped off all the semi-permanent moorings you can get in rivers and places. And then when we got our newer Southerly, not new to us, not a new boat, she's been here ever since.
Brilliant. And can you reflect on how sailing has shaped your life?
I think probably in many ways it's made confidence and independence, most definitely, because when you're on that yacht, you've got to sort out whatever needs sorting out. So Nick taught me a good expression that they have in the submarine course, which was improvise, adapt and overcome. So whenever something happens, that's what we do. And there's been a couple of experiences that we've had when we've needed to improvise and we've overcome in the end. So it's probably made us like that. But as Nick's probably told you, we live on our boat. The whole summer for the last 3 years, we've been incredibly lucky since early retirement. So somewhat frugally, but it's been absolutely wonderful. We've just been away for 6 months sailing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome.
Welcome to Hornet Services Sailing Club. Today I've got Nick, and Nick's going to tell us a bit about his story and connection with the club. So Nick, if you can tell me, how did you first get into sailing and at what age were you?
I was about 12 or 13 years old, and we were, my dad had a family farm in Kent, and we had a big fruit farm with a big reservoir, and we had a little sunflower dinghy to sail on in the reservoir. That's how I learnt sailing. So about 12, 13 years of age on the family reservoir on the family farm.
Brilliant. And your first experience of sailing in the armed forces, at what stage of your career and where?
I joined up in 1975, and at, I think it's Jupiter Point in Tor Point in Cornwall. We were probably all, as I was from the Seamen's branch, thrown into the Hurleys for a couple of days and sailed all around Plymouth Sound and stuff. I remember going into some of the marinas there with about 10 or 15 Hurleys, 4 on board. That's how we learned to sail.
All right.
In the Navy.
And were you at Raleigh or were you
was
at
in Raleigh.
You were at Raleigh as a young seaman?
As a young seaman, yeah.
Brilliant. What did that lead to?
That led to, as I joined the submarine service, we had in those days, I think they were called some operational papers, can't remember what they're called now, but they said, oh, you can volunteer to go on, do some sailing in our off-crew time, because I was on the Polaris system, which lent me down here to JSASTC, or JSASTC as it was then. And I remember my first sail was a Nicholson 55 Adventurer. I remember that being special because it had round portals rather than square ones, because we were told it had just come back from the Whitbread round the world race. So this would be in early 1976. And we sailed in a channel for about a week and went to Sark. I remember anchoring in Sark. That's what I remember about that trip. Meeting
Brilliant.
all people from all walks of life in all services.
And when did you first sail out of Hornet? In a private boat, an established boat, a regimental yacht, or with joint services?
So we did a lot more sailing in joint services. Sailed a lot in Dasher. So one of the things, because I was in the Polaris system, was always a trip in the Mediterranean. And I think this would have been 77 or 78, somewhere around about that time. But got on a plane, went to Gibraltar, because we're going to be sailing in the Med. It was none of that. It was bringing Dasher back to Hornet over a 10-day period. We didn't stop anywhere. And going through Biscay, I was sick, and that's cured me of seasickness. I have never been sick to this day. Spent many hours over the back of Dasher looking at the sea. I can't mention the other words that went through my mind at the time, but that was sailing on Dasher.
And that was one of the Nick 55s.
That's a Nicholson 55, and she's alongside.
She's still here.
Yeah, she's still here.
Good
so
grief.
am I.
And where did that experience take you?
I think because I was in Scotland all my career, probably sailed out of the Clyde submarine base on their big boat, can't remember what it's called, and did bosun dinghy sailing. One of my friends later in the 80s had his own boat, which we based on the Gairloch, and used to do a lot of sailing with him down in the Clyde. But we were youngsters, we would deliberately try to sail it on its side, try to get the sails in the water, but it was just good fun when you were youngsters. It's not like that today.
No, today I guess you reef a lot more.
Oh yes, yeah.
So if you can tell us about some of your most memorable sailing events with the services or privately owned yachts, whether it was racing or cruising.
I've never been into racing, but it's cruising. I think I remember the good days being on Adventure, being on Dasher, the Nick 55s, or any of the service boats. I suppose private boats wouldn't be till up to modern day, sort of 2012, sailing with my wife Alison on any of the owned boats we've had over the years.
And how did you come to own your own boat?
I think after I met Alison back in 2011, I think we had a third share in a boat. Then we decided we need to own our own boat, and we bought a Southerly 115 back in 2014 as a wedding present to ourselves. So we've wholly owned our own boat since 2014, so only 10 years now.
Uh-huh. And has you always been at Hornet?
Just about. I think we bought our first yacht here back in 2015, 2016.
Ah. And can you reflect on how sailing has shaped your life?
Until we retired 2 years ago, sailing was only for weekends, occasional evenings, or 2 weeks away whenever we could get leave. Since we retired, sailing is our life now. We stay on board the entire summer months, so this will be our third year on board our current Southerly. We're off to France probably tomorrow, and we will stay there for 6 months. So we live entirely on the boat during the summer months. So sailing is our lives, and Hornet is important for us for that.
Yeah. And when you go via the Scillies?
Not this time. We may come back via the Scillies. We went via the Scillies 2 years ago on our trip to Scotland.
It's gorgeous there.
Yes.
That's one of my favourite places to sail. Well, Nick, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome to Hornet Services Sailing Club. Today I'm going to have a chat with Mike. Mike's going to tell us about his sailing career. So Mike, if you can tell me how you first got into sailing, at what age and where?
Okay, I was brought up in Dunleary, south of Dublin, the ferry port of Dunleary, right by the water. And my father used to fly planes for a hobby, and one of his mates died in a plane crash. I was about 10 when I saw that. My mother said, right, enough of that, you're not going down that route. Dad then started building little boats and so on, and he made my brother and I join the little local sailing club when we were about 10 or 11, and that was in about 1958 or 59. We joined this little sailing club, typical little suburban sailing club that had heron dinghies and cadet dinghies, and out we went, freezing cold, old-fashioned life jackets, hating every minute to start with, but then gradually getting to like it more and more. And that was when we were about sort of 10, 11, 12. And it was weekends, after school, whatever, herons and cadets. So probably fairly typical, actually, kids of that age. My father then started building other boats, as he wasn't allowed to go flying anymore, and he started building little motorboats and bigger ones again. So we'd help him on those, building those, and going out in the bay and having weekend picnics and so on afloat in motorboats. And one of my first experiences with little boats was he borrowed a friend's 14-foot clinker boat, and we went miles and miles and miles out to sea till the land disappeared, and I was very, very scared looking back. Where's Mummy gone? Anyway, we caught lots of fish that day, lots and lots of fish in this little clinker boat, brought it back with a little seagull outboard, and that was another way of falling in love with the water.
Aha. So, and your first experience of sailing in the armed forces, and at what stage of your career and where?
Okay, well, I'd started out doing a bit of bigger boat sailing when I was a teenager, helping local folks with deliveries and things, so I knew a little bit about it. When I got to Dartmouth, which is where I started training in the mid-60s as a cadet, they had boats on the river there, of course, and I volunteered to do that, to go on the boats, and picket boats, motorboats, pulling whalers, Montague whalers, bosun dinghies, all that kind of thing. So most evenings, most weekends, and went away occasionally on the college yachts. Those days the yachts were pretty old, pretty beaten up, leaky wooden decks, so sleeping in bunks with water pouring in on you. But great fun, great experience. I was just a young cadet at the time, and then after I moved on from there, I went up to college in London. I was in Greenwich for 3 years, and we used to sail on the Medway, again, with dinghies against local universities, local clubs on the Thames down the Medway. And on one occasion, we borrowed one of the university yachts, a little tiny 19-foot yacht, and we knew bugger all about going out to the open sea, but we thought we'd take this little tiny boat to Holland for the weekend, because we thought Holland was a very close-by place, and we hadn't a clue. So we set off down the Medway, and it took hours just to get to the open sea. And by the time we got to the open sea, it was brown and rough. And again, we were losing sight of land and getting quite frightened. And it was getting dark and cold, and we thought we'll never make Holland like this. So we turned around, raced back across the shoals and the mud banks, and we saw this little place on the map, a little tiny fishing port, a little oyster port on the North Kent coast. Might have been Whitstable. Does that ring a bell? Anyway,
Sounds about right.
We scraped into Whitstable, hadn't a clue what we were doing, crashed alongside the pier. My mate John said, we better put the yellow flag up because we've come in from abroad. So we hoisted the yellow flag and we got to bed because we were knackered. About 2 a.m, there was an almighty bang on the deck and a crash. And we woke up to see 2 size 10 boots on the deck and a man in uniform saying, what the hell are you doing and where have you come from and where's your paperwork and where's your license and where's your passports? And of course we hadn't come from abroad, we'd come down the river and got lost. And that was our first mighty bollocking from the bureaucracy.
So, and where did that lead you?
I just working through the system, going up through the ranks, various different jobs, but I always tried to keep in touch with sailing. I did what they call my application course. That's the technical training. You've done your college bit, then you do your technical training bit. I was what they called WE, Weapons Electrical, in those days. So we had to do all our electronic training at Collingwood, HMS Collingwood. HMS Collingwood at the time had its own, it had 2 boats. It had a Belmore class 36-foot ocean racer and a little tiny fiberglass yacht called Proton. And so I used to volunteer to crew for Electron at weekends from here, and that would have been 68, 69, I suppose. So I crewed most of the race season in 68 and 69 on Electron, and my mate John and I and Terry Nash, who was here, and a guy called Mike Wigston, who was a famous ocean racer, a Navy guy, took us on. We did the Fastnet in 69. And that was my first taste of long distance ocean racing.
So that was the question. When did you first sail out of Hornet? In a private boat, an establishment yacht, regimental yacht, or with joint services?
It was long before, I was sailing out from here long before joint service even arrived from the scene. When I first came here, you could just walk straight off the road or climb over the fence. It was open house, and it was a bit like it was in the early 60s still. Heale Marina across the way hadn't been built. Pneumonia Bridge is still in existence. And when you looked out of here, it was mostly a great sea of mud right across the harbour, no Heale Marina. And all the establishments back then had their own yachts. So we would borrow their yachts at weekends. So they were Nick 32s, they were little Sadlers, they were Hurley 22s, all sorts of boats. So you could borrow from the establishments. Even the Victory class clinker-built yachts, we'd take them away and race them at weekends. So was using establishment yachts, friends' yachts, and that was it really. We even took away whalers. One occasion, we took a whaler, an ancient Edwardian whaler, away from here and cheekily entered it in Cows Week. So we had race yacht, Ted Heath's race yacht and all that, and then us on a whaler. We really buggered up the handicappers, especially when we rowed.
Brilliant. So where did that experience take you?
Of course, in between all this, I had to go and work on ships and things. Had to be at sea doing jobs and things.
Really?
Yeah, we all had, didn't we? Where did it take me? Just really kind of sailing when I could at weekends and things. I was a submariner for about 3 or 4 years, and towards the end of my submarine time, I left submarines because I didn't want to go join the nuclear fleet and go to Scotland. I lazily thought I'd stay down here and do a bit more sailing. So I left the submarine service. And about the time I left the submarine service, I saw an advert in a paper for a yacht for sale. And I liked old-fashioned classic yachts. And when I was a youngster, there were lots of old traditional Irish vessels, traditional Irish working vessels, a bit like the sort of thing you see in Falmouth, where I lived, in Dunleary. And we saw one of these advertised. There was a boat called the Ark, a Galway hooker, 44 foot, 20 tons. And 1887. So we saw her advertised. I was only 20-something at the time, 22, 23 or something. Saw her advertised, and I went over to have a look at her. We bought her for £2,000.
I guess that was a few bob back then.
What?
I guess that was a few bob back then.
Yeah, probably only earning about £23 a month then or something, yeah. And we sailed her back, and it's a long story. It's in one of the magazines, the story. But we sailed her back in the days when we had no instrumentation whatever, zero, and maybe 1 or 2 old charts written by Captain Cook when he was a midshipman. And the compass was an old metal thing we found, and we filled it full of gin from the local pub as we left. And an amazing adventure sailing her back. And so we had the Ark, as she was called, 1887 Ark Galway hooker, rigged as a ketch at the time, gaff ketch, and we had her here out on the mudbirds in the midstream, as I say, before the Heale Marina was built. So many happy years or unhappy years when all you guys were away skiing and enjoying the high life. Me and John, most weekends when we weren't at work, filthy overalls in the Dutch barn, steaming planks, putting in hot tar upside down, listening to Elton John on the background, or ABBA, it was that era, breaking planks, curving planks, hammering them in, learning to make nails, learning how to use an adze, making frames, decking, redecking, all the rest. We eventually ran out of money and ran out of time, and we were being pushed to get back to work, get in time in the morning, stop being late. And I was commuting to a ship in Plymouth by motorbike in the winter.
Oh.
In fact, this is before the joint services came here, there was a concrete hut on the jetty down there with no light, no power, no nothing. The boat was too wet and sodden and dark and old to sleep on. So I used to sleep on a floor in this concrete shed behind the mast shed.
His dedication.
Every time we went back in the water, it would take weeks to take water up. So you had to lie on a trestle if you wanted to sleep with your hand down like that. As soon as your fingers got cold, you woke up and gave a few 50, with the pump.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, can you tell us something about the most memorable sailing events with service or private racing or cruising?
Okay. I was lucky enough when I was serving on a ship, HMS Bristol. This is after the joint services arrived here. I came to them and said, can we borrow a Nick 55? Dear old Dasher, the last one left. We borrow a Nick 55 and I'll set up this expedition. As our ship was going on a major NATO exercise covering all of the Atlantic and the Atlantic coast right round to Scandinavia and back again, the Army, the RAF and the Navy. So I was going to involve, I had a DCI written, I wrote it up, and it was called Exercise Carib Dash, and we were going to use joint services skippers, myself, a few others, and the crew would be continuously changing, flying out to different places. I had to arrange all of that. This was done by telephone boxes and letter writing before digital. So trying to do it from a ship as well. Trying to arrange, Ren Miggins hasn't turned up at Bryce Norton, her granny has turned up instead or something, whatever it is. Trying to do that from sea on a ship in the days before internet. So trying to get 11 crews to each place with 17 stages, trying to get crews to each place and all the flights arranged and all their baggage and all the victuals and the boats program and the diplomatic clearances, all the rest. Me doing it from my cabin on a ship without any modern technology. It's quite difficult. Anyway, I had to do a leg as well. I did the leg. I couldn't skipper her because that would have meant they would then have to fly out a skipper. So basically I had to step back and I was the organizer and navigator for the first couple of legs. It's down to Gib and across the Canaries and then across to Trinidad. And with the Nick 55 skipper. And there were crews of three, we had people from 3 ships on that leg. And then we handed over in Trinidad to another leg, and so on it went. And that was a 3-month circular trip. And John Giblett, who's a member here, actually was the last skipper for the leg back across the Atlantic back to Hornet from the east coast of the States. And he'd only gone out 2 days when the mast fell down. So he ended up back in the States, and Lloyd's wouldn't let him. He wanted to chop a foot off the broken mast and re-erect it with shorter rigging. But Lloyd's wouldn't let him do that, the insurers. So they had to fly a Galaxy out with the mast from here. At that stage, they wrote to me and said, "You're off the plot. your bit is finished." And then that was my service, big service trip. But after I left the Navy, I did lots and lots of trips because I could afford the time after I left in my own boats. I've had about 7 boats at Hornet over the years, gradually increasing in size. Well, apart from the Ark, the first big one, the rest were ordinary size, like a Rival 32, Halcyon 27, Storm 33, Ocean Ranger 38, the current one's a Dale at 34, so they went up and down in size. I've done lots of long trips of those, and two around Britain and Ireland, once around together, so 2 separate each island, and then around both together. Then all the outer islands, St Kilda, Exped, Norway, Canaries, Portugal, Spain, France, up through Holland, down to the Med, 4 transatlantics, all on, well, not all my, but one of the 4 was the Carib Dash one. 2 transatlantics, my own boat, and lived in the Caribbean for a year on that one. So
really, you haven't got much experience at all?
No, I don't know how to tie a knot. No. I still get things wrong. I still go out now. When I go out now, I still get things wrong. You can never, every situation, even just coming in on a Saturday to go alongside in cows or something, you're still going, oh God, look, whatever. And you still think, oh shit, I made a poo of that one. So,
So that's something for everybody to take
you learn all
away.
the time, yeah.
So have you always had boats here at Hornet?
Yeah, I have. A bit sad, isn't it? So I still haven't. I think I went skiing when I was very young with the Royal Marines. I would have loved to have carried on. I would have loved to have taken up flying. I would have loved to have taken up lots of things. But unfortunately, I shouldn't say that. I stuck with boats, and that sort of sucked me in. And now my house is full of boat bits, my bits and other people's, to the roof. Yeah, so it's painted. It's written like through Brighton Rock.
Yes. So can you reflect on how sailing has shaped your life?
I think I've just done that. Yeah, well, yeah, it has its shape. Yes, of course. You get a great understanding for nature and a great respect for the sea and for weather and also people. I mean, I crewed with lots of people and they've crewed for me. And when you're crammed together on a small boat, of course, you see things and hear things that you wouldn't normally. People who you get on with wonderfully, you think, oh God, I wish you'd stop doing that. You know, you kind of, you learn more to live it, but you know, to be more acceptable, yeah, yes. Whatever, yeah. And it's a great social life as well. Yeah, and I have to say, guiltily, it has, you know, back when I was younger, no, Mum, I can't come home this weekend, I'm sailing. Same thing these days to my kids and grandkids. Can't see this weekend, I'm sailing. Yeah, sad, isn't it, really? I should take up knitting or something.
Well, perhaps when you get past going out sailing. Well, Mike, that's been fascinating. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome to Hornet Services Sailing Club. Today I've got Mike Shrives with me, so I'm going to ask him a set of questions. So Mike, how did you first get into sailing and at what age and where?
In 1963, when I was 7 years old, my father was appointed to VX1 Squadron in Boca Chica, which is 2 keys up from Key West. He was there to fly the Sikorsky S-61 helicopter in order to evaluate it for use by the Fleet Air Arm, which became the Sea King under contract with Westlands. And during that time, David Llewellyn was the other Royal Navy exchange officer in Key West, who later became OIC JSASTC and also owned a boat called Percussion. David owned a Sunfish, which he taught me to sail, and also let me use it for my, first race, which I managed to win, largely because I was very young and very light, and it was a very fickle day, and all the other competitors were adults, and so their boats were that much heavier. Yeah. However, that's where it all began, and then. Continuing with my father's appointments, he went to HMS Daedalus as the executive officer or commander, and I joined Leon's Solent Sailing Club, and then I sailed with a chap called Patrick Banfield in a Firefly, and then later on in a Flying Dutchman. The difference between the two was that we would do very well on handicap, in the Firefly, but we were always the last back to the beach. In the Flying Dutchman, we were always the first back to the beach, which also meant hot showers, dry floors, and the choice of the tea that the wives and ladies at the club had provided. So there was a quantum difference as opposed to the wet floors, cold showers, and what was left of the food.
Brilliant. And your first experience of sailing in the armed forces, at what age of your career and where?
Well, again, joining Dartmouth in 1975, Britannia Royal Naval College, I was issued with a Services Yacht Proficiency card. It was a DCI, actually, a Defence Council Instruction. And because I'd sailed before, and also I did my first Cows Week in a boat called Gunfleet of Hamble before I joined the Navy, then I quickly got into offshore sailing. And Derek Deeprose, who was there at the time, Lieutenant Commander, quite famous examiner and also well known by lots of people who went through BRNC, we went off on a tall ships race in the Morgan Giles 45 Griffiths. And it was after that he signed off my, what we effectively competent cruise certificate. Then I went on to get a day skipper's ticket while still at Dartmouth. And so I used to take the boats out, you know, on my own accord. We were allowed to do that. And then with my career, I was a pressman into submarines, but HMS Dolphin had an establishment yacht called Shah. And in a feisty command race, as they used to call them, to Guernsey and back, the skipper, Vic Bird, signed off my coastal skipper's ticket. Yeah. So really, that's where it started.
Mm. And the next question then, and where did that lead to?
Well, it was the start of a you know, a career whereby I was sailing almost all the time. And I mean, obviously there were periods like flying training, the Falklands War, etc., that there was no sailing. However, I continued to sail establishment yachts, and also when we were in the ships and at various different ports around the world, if there was an opportunity to go sailing, I used to grab it, which in that period culminated in HMS Invincible. We did a round the world trip, and I left the ship in Sydney in Australia and then jumped on a boat called Buccaneer, a maxi rater, to do the Sydney Hobart race. Wow. So coming back to that, so yes, and then continue with that. I then went back to sea again, but joined Britannia Royal Naval College on the staff, and really that's where a lot of sailing, of my service sailing, came from, because I became the college yachts officer, and we had an SJ-35 called Amaryllis stationed there at the time. And so I did lots of channel racing, teaching the midshipmen how to sail, 2 Fastnet races in her. And, and so it was a very good time of developing the sailing, but also giving back as well by, teaching others.
And so leading on then, when did you first sail out of Hornet? In a private yacht, establishment, regimental yacht, or with joint services?
Really, I would say with joint services. It was JSASTC at the time, the Joint Services Sailing Club. And Richard Yeomans was the Rear Commodore offshore for the Royal Naval Sailing Association. The Royal Navy had not won the Services Offshore Regatta for 11 years. But Richard knew that there were quite a number of us who were sailing in private yachts on the circuit. And so called us all in to the Navy team. I was selected as the navigator of Adventure, I think it was in those days, but it's certainly one of the Nicholson 55s. And we won that year, and then continued as members of, I continued as a member of the Royal Navy sailing team from there on. Also, due to it, I became the captain of the Navy team when I was a lieutenant commander, and the Rear Commodore offshore when I was a commander. So really steeped in Navy thing, and all those boats, the Service Offshore Regatta boats, were either the Nic 55s or the Sigma 38, which was stationed here, run by Sultan Boats, Ian Hill and his gang, or otherwise one of the Victoria 34s. And in fact, I tended to skipper the Victoria 34, the Navy boat, and was fortunate enough to win a few of the the trophies as sailing that boat. But also because I was stationed at Sultan at the time, I got to know all the Victoria 34s, and they are slightly different. So I deliberately used to pick the fastest one. At the time, it was Rapana, but unfortunately, Rapana was parked on a beach underneath the cliffs in Durston Head, and so she's no longer with us, but she was the fastest one. So again, a little bit of an advantage.
Yeah, there's always an advantage. So can you tell us some of the most memorable sailing events with services or private racing or cruising?
Yeah, 79 Fastnet is obviously one that is seared in the memory. We set off on the race, but obviously the Lord was looking down on us because we broke 2 halyards in the first night, so we only had 1 halyard left. And then the rudder started to squeak. And so we sat around, there was 7 of us on board. I was the skipper, age 24, I think. And we put it to a vote whether to continue or not. And the vote was very much, we're going to knock this on the head. So we never got into the RSC, but we went down then to Guernsey for a run ashore.
A Vic or...
No, it wasn't. It was a Nicholson 33. It was a private boat called Framboise, Nicholson 33. And so again, the 3/4 tonner, which is the boats that were really heavily hit in the RSC. But we turned around and we went down to Guernsey because we were all bachelors. We all had lots of money. We had the time off and off we went. And we were there enjoying ourselves until the owner's son, Richard Thompson, bought a newspaper and we were reported as lost. So Framboise was lost. And I can vividly remember sitting in one of those telephone booths with the A and B buttons and a great big pile of coins, ringing everybody up. Because of course in those days, I mean, the offshore rules changed substantially after 79 Fastnet. And in those days, you only declared if you finished the race. So if you decided to leave the race, you just went home. So nobody knew from the management point of view, where you were. And that was the situation then, but of course it's all changed. And for the better as well. So that was one memorable. I also, in 1980-ish, learned how they film single-handed sailors, because I did a trip with Dame Naomi James from here down to Plymouth, including an overnighter. And they had a film crew on board. And what they used to do is they would get us as the crew to sit below in silence, out of the camera angle like this. And we were told, very much do not make a noise. They would then film Dame Naomi. And then once the camera had stopped rolling, we were all invited to come back on board and sail the boat. So that was another big memory.
So is that how they do it when they go around the world? And
oh yeah, people
the whole crew.
Yeah, absolutely, out of sight. Indeed, yeah.
Brilliant. How did you come to own your own boat?
Right. Well, I sailed service and establishment yachts throughout my entire career, and also having left the Navy, I became the General Secretary of the Royal Naval Sailing Association. And so I always had access to boats. And I've sailed almost all the establishment yachts, when I look back in my logbooks. A lot of them from here, of course, because we had Sultan boats. But I suppose actually they were mod-owned. Because certainly Nick Fletcher and I, when we were commanders and working over in the dockyard, we used to nip across to do the Wednesday night races in one of the Fox Terriers called Proteus. And we had a lot of fun doing that. And then there was the MG 346s, Spirit of Daedalus, because of course my affiliation with the Fleet Air Arm. Sailed her in Wednesday night races and various things, Yarmouth trophies, Channel races, etc. And Guinevere as well, which was the Sultan equivalent. So yeah, so lots of boats like that, and then later on sailing from here with Widgeon, which was owned by Nick Fletcher, and then so it wasn't until I left the job as General Secretary that I bought my first yacht. I'd owned dinghies before and had a kind of Laser 2000, which I sailed from Leon Solar Sailing Club. And also, back in the day, I used to borrow a bosun from Graham Forshaw, who was the RN sailing coach. And he had 6 bosuns that were, almost new and lighter than the average bosun. And I used to do things like with Sarah, my wife, we used to go off to things like the Weymouth Regatta and do well. But again, there was an advantage in the fact that this bosun was unlike other bosuns that were in the fleet. So, yeah, so that, But coming back to the question, I bought a boat called Ursus, which was owned by Richard Yeomans for almost 20 years. Kept over in Dolphin Pool, but as soon as I bought the boat, then I, moved it into Hornet with Artie and Stuart found me a berth. And I've been here ever since, and will not leave because it's a wonderful club and it's a wonderful berth, place to sail from.
Absolutely. I mean, the glory of sailing out of Hornet is your sails are up before you leave the creek.
Yeah.
And you turn the corner and you've got the whole of the Solent.
Absolutely.
Whereas somebody up at something like Port Solent or Swanwick, they've got an hour's motoring before they can put sails up.
Indeed. And it's the same with JSASTC, JSASTC as it became. That effectively, the boats come out of here and straight away they're in the Eastern Solent, which is a very good place to sail. And so, yes, it's a very convenient, base. But of course, looking back in the history, when you think of the, motor torpedo boats coming from here, exactly the same. They would have been out into the channel, doing their work, and brave men, all of them. Although Hornet at the time was largely run by women, because it was the Wrens, and they did all the fueling and the ammunitioning of the boats. So and the maintenance, absolutely. But there was also another factor to that I read about, saying that because there were lots of women coming into the base, the Germans didn't really think that it was that important strategically. So again, but the position of this, and of course, Haslar Hospital, because the jetty used to bring, in days of yore, all the injured sailors into here and then wheel them up, which is now the Submarine Museum, of course, into Haslar Hospital, which is the first place that they did triage. And so, lots of history of the club, but I agree, an amazing location geographically.
And can you reflect on how sailing has shaped your life?
Oh, totally. I mean, it's given me so much joy, but also I think it comes down to the people. And the other thing is, of course, is that you leave your rank on the jetty when you go sailing. So it's all ranks and all rates, and it's wonderful. I've got so many friends and have such a, lovely life because of that, because of all the friendships I've had with all the people I've sailed with and all the contact people I've sailed with and the other services. Because initially when I sailed for the Navy, then it was very, kind of competition against the other services. But quickly you realise that you fight hard on the water, but as soon as you go across the finishing line, it's all over. And I've got so many friends and acquaintances, from the other services, and we've had great runs ashore, due to sailing. The other thing,
much like rugby then.
Oh yeah. Except, right, there's this difference there. I'll tell you the difference in rugby. I realise that sailing is a sport you can do for life. You don't have to give it up in middle age.
No.
Whereas in rugby, you have to give it up in middle age, although you can continue to go and sit in the stands and watch it. But the great thing about sailing is you participate, as I still am. I've just turned 70, and I'm still out on the circuit enjoying life.
Well, Mike, thank you so much. That's been very, very enjoyable.
Thank you.
Welcome to Hornet Services Sailing Club. I'm here today with Peter. So Peter, how did you first get into sailing, and at what age and where?
Well, I was born and brought up in Porchester, at the top end of Pompey Harbour. And so my first sailing trip was with my father in a Porchester duck. And I must have been about 4 or 5. And then sailing went on. We went up to the Norfolk Broads as kids on families. And that's how my sailing started. But Porchester Sailing Club was really what built up my sailing knowledge and my sailing fun. I ended up at one stage, I owned a Porchester duck, and then I had a Cherub, and then I had an OK in racing out of Pompey Harbour, around Pompey Harbour.
Brilliant. So, and your first experience of sailing in the armed forces, at what stage of your career and where?
Well, I joined Dartmouth at 17 and a half, and I arrived down there and they said, you have to do this number of hours on the river. And I thought, well, I have to, and I'm being paid for it. And that was it. I spent my whole life down the River Dart, sailing.
Brilliant. And were you on the rowing boats as well? You did all of that, everything? The motor boats?
Montague, sailing, no, the Montague whalers, sailing the 32-foot cutters and sailing the college yachts, the Morgan Giles 43s. I mean, and then in fact, when I was at Dartmouth, my third year at Dartmouth, that's when I did my first Fastnet race in the Dartmouth yacht.
Wow.
In 1969.
Just a boy.
Just a boy.
And so I was going to lead on to where did that lead you to?
Well, basically, when I was down there at Dartmouth, I did a heck of a lot of sailing, offshore sailing, cruising. Dartmouth yachts used to cruise across the channel in the holidays, and I would always go on those. And as I said, I did the Fastnet race, but that's where I got, in those days, RNSA were doing the tickets, the offshore tickets. They started them up and then the RYA took them on. And thanks to somebody, a predecessor of mine here at Hornet, Rear Admiral Charles Williams, he was the man who pushed it all through. But my offshore ticket was given to me by Tony Wardell, another Hornet member.
Oh, a long time ago then.
Yeah.
When did you first sail out of Hornet? In a private boat or an established boat?
No,
it's a joint service boat.
My first sail, in fact, is one of the photographs I gave Richard Farrington, but my first sail out of Hornet was in Collingwood's windfall, or a windfall, which of Collingwood, I think called Sea Hex, which belonged to Daedalus, but I must have been about 9 or 10.
Oh, right.
But then my father, when he bought a boat, he based his boat here.
At Hornet?
At Hornet, yeah.
So was he one of the originals to set the
Yes, he was, yeah. I mean, Dad and his mates, basically, they saw an opportunity when the fast patrol boats pulled out, and there were these jetties, and they got permission from Commander-in-Chief to put yachts there. And the idea was that you left your yacht here when you went to sea. And it rapidly grew from there.
And that's where it brings us today then.
Yeah, does indeed.
And where did that experience take you? So you already said that you've been on a Fastnet, but
well, I was very lucky. I mean, when I then started sailing with as a RNSA member, I got into various RNSA yachts, sailing offshore in the RORC races. I used to sail with somebody called Peter Poland in a boat called Matchless, and then I went on from there and then got involved with the 73 Whitbread race, where they were looking for volunteers. Because I'd done a lot of Rorke racing, I was one of the people who was lucky enough to be selected. And then my sailing career after that, I then went into Admiral's Cup boats in a boat called Lugane, owned by Sir Maurice Lang, sailed with him for 7 years. And, was abroad and sailed there. And everywhere I go, I sail.
Well, it's much nicer way of travelling than flying.
It is, yeah.
And tell us about some of your most memorable sailing events with service or private yachts, racing or cruising.
I mean, I think the pinnacle of my sailing career has got to be the opportunity to do the first leg of the Whitbread race in 73 in adventure. I was lucky enough to be part of the team that was involved in the crew selections. I did a lot of the trials and helping select the people. But I mean, when I put it this way, in 1973, all I did all year was sail for Her Majesty.
And couldn't you have gone the whole way round?
No, I mean...
Or was it just being greedy?
Well, no, it wasn't that. I mean, the justification, when the Navy or when the Armed Services said they were going to buy the Nick 55s, and the first one was Adventure, and Adventure was basically beefed up slightly, so she was a bit stronger than the standard one. And the Navy justified, well, getting these yachts. Part of it was that the Whitbread race would actually train up people who then become the core of what eventually became the Joint Services or JSASTC as it then was, but it was to train up people to pass on their knowledge in sail training for the services.
So that's how you come up to doing the first leg.
Well, I was lucky enough to do the first leg, and then, in fact, when I came back from that, it must have been about a year after I came back, they sent me off to sea. They thought, well, I ought to go and do some work. So, and then when I came back from that, I actually was lucky enough to be back here again for a while. I took Dasher when she was brand new out of the yard.
All right, that's the one we still got.
That's the one we still got, yeah.
So, I mean, lots of people have sailed on Dasher.
Yeah, in fact, I did a Fastnet race on Dasher in '75, just before I got married, and I only just got back in time to get married.
It was a slow one, was it? Wasn't like the 79 then?
Well, 69 was slow. The 79 was fast. That was the rough one.
that was the
No, 69, the first one I did, we took 7.5 days, and our skipper was a chain smoker who ran out of cigarettes after 5. So you can imagine what that was like.
Bit grumpy time you got in the
Yeah, it was, yeah.
So, Peter, can you tell me what you did when you left the Navy?
Well, after I left the Navy, my first job was was 18 months with a large charity, and I then realised that the charity world wasn't quite what I was cut out for. So I moved on. I was lucky enough. I then became the general manager, which was then the title for what was essentially the CEO of the Royal Ocean Racing Club. And I've been a Royal Ocean Racing Club member myself since 1972. But I then found myself running that. That was the last time the Admiral's Cup was run when I was there. So we were running the Admiral's Cup, Commodore's Cup, Fastnet race, and all the Rourke races. And that was...
So what was the demise of the Admiral's Cup then? Was that your fault?
No, that was a lot of very interesting... If you ask 10 yachties, you'll get 85 different answers. But the simple answer is, I'm afraid that ocean racing has moved on. Mm-hmm. The long races we used to do over the weekends had been truncated down to about a 24, 36-hour race. I think the other problem is you've got a lot of people who own these big boats who are professional with professional crews, whereas when I was basically Admiral's Cupping, it was amateur crews. Mm. And you pull together to sail for your country, but when you're professional and your boats are owned by some very, very wealthy individuals, it's much more of an individual game. And we found it extremely difficult to get people to pull together into a team. Mm. And in the end, the best thing to do was put the cup back in the box, and it's coming back again, in fact, in next year, 2025. And they're starting very much as we always said you're going to have to do, which is where it was in the first days in the 1950s, which was just a bunch of boats at Cowes, and you said, right, top 3 who happen to be from that country will be that country's team. Mm. And do it very, very informally, if you like, and slowly let it build. But it's going to be an interesting, I should watch much interest. Mm. But it's, Commodore's Cup, that was extremely successful. And of course, the Fastnet race has grown and grown and grown.
Yeah, I mean, the Fastnet races, I mean, everybody knows about the 79 Fastnet, but there's been one every 2 years.
Yep, one every 2 years. And I think the important thing about the 79 Fastnet, and in fact, the boat I used to sail in, Lugane, the owner, skipper, who had been a Commodore of the Royal Ocean Racing Club, he chaired the board of inquiry into it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the lessons that came out of the 79 race are now very much absolutely embedded in offshore racing. Yeah. And it's the safety. I mean, the one thing I always remind people is on that 79 Fastnet race, not one boat sank. Mm. A lot of people died. Yeah. They stepped into life rafts that weren't fit for purpose and all sorts of things, but not one boat sank.
Mm. And that's the key point, I guess.
Best life raft of all.
Absolutely.
But no, I love running Rourke, and I ran that for 7 years. And during that time, obviously with the Royal Ocean Racing Club, it is also responsible for the IRC rating system. So I looked after the rating office down in Lymington. And then when I left the Rourke, I first of all became chairman of IRC, which was basically a body of all the international countries, setting out the rule and doing rule changes on an annual basis. And then I became a measurer, measuring yachts. And then I set up my own regatta company with a good friend. And for 10 years, we ran regattas overseas. And we ran Antigua Race Week, Oyster Cups. We ran racing out in Oman, Dubai, the Dubai Muscat Race, the Middle East, the Far East. And I had a wonderful time. Didn't make a lot of money, but had a lot of fun.
Did you get involved in the America's Cup at all?
No.
Stayed well away from that.
Stayed
Too much
well
money.
away. Yes, and I think that there's all sorts of undercurrents which you don't want to get involved in, I'm afraid. I don't, anyway.
And how did you come to own your own boat?
Well, when I was coming up to I'd always sailed other people's boats or did a lot of serious racing in very big boats and expensive boats, so I knew I could never afford a boat like that. But when I was coming up to retirement from the Navy, I thought there's this thing called a gratuity. So I knew I'd only get away with it once. So I said to my wife, I said, it's really not great. I said, after all this time, the Navy, they say to you, you've got to pay them a thing called a gratuity when you leave, but in return, they give you a boat. And I got away with that for about 2 nanoseconds. But no, that's when I bought a boat. So I bought a boat just before I retired from the Navy. For very selfish reasons, because it meant as I was a serving member, I managed to get a berth here straight away, and I've stayed here ever since.
And what boat was that? Was it a racing boat?
It was an interesting boat. It was a thing called a First 300, which was wedge-shaped and sailed like a dinghy until you got to about 19 or 20 knots, and then it would fall on its ear, but you were never quite sure which ear it would fall on. But when it was surveyed, the surveyor, who was actually a RNSA member, he wrote me a lovely survey report. And a little note he attached, he said, it looks fast and fun. And I rang him up and said, you're meant to say a good, sensible family cruising boat. But it was a lovely little boat to sail.
And so you've always kept a boat here at Hornet then?
Yeah, I kept that boat for about 4 or 5 years. And then I bought an Elan 333, which is the Wild Blue, the first Wild Blue. And I raced her and we cruised her for 12, 14 years. And then bought the current boat 5 years ago.
Which is the old Maxi 1100.
Maxi 1100, yeah.
And now is it just for cruising, or are you still got the itch to rag it around a bit?
We were over in France in the old boat, in the Elan. And Deborah said to me one evening in the boat, she said, I think we need a bigger boat. And I thought, well, I'll have that in the logbook. But then she said, but you're not racing. I mean, I love my racing, but racing is an expensive game.
It is.
And the boys kept on saying to her, we've got to let Peter get a new sail for this and a new that for that. I don't miss not having to organise a crew. That organising a crew was a bit of a nightmare the whole time. 8 crew was hard work. But no, I mean, time moves on. I keep on being told that not everyone in the Solent knows I'm racing them, but...
Well, the definition of a race is 2 boats going in the same direction.
That's right, exactly that.
And can you reflect on how sailing has shaped your life?
Yes, I mean, I think I was very lucky. A lot of my racing time was actually in civilian boats, and I was probably the only naval person. So I've got an enormous network of friends in the civilians who we race together. I mean, they're all sorts of walks of life. You know, one of them I know is a local builder, one's a dentist, you know, I mean, all sorts of people, one's a farmer. So that was great. I met a whole lot of really interesting people. And then, of course, the naval sailing, and particularly the Round the World race, we just had our reunion last year for the 50th anniversary of the race, which is a bit frightening. But, you know, they will be lifetime friends, long life friends. And when you've shared an experience like that, quite frankly, there's something, well, it's like anyone who's done those sorts of things, there's something very special about it.
Yeah, I mean, adversity brings friends together, or people closer together.
But there was a lovely comment made by George Vallings, who skippered leg 3 of the first Whitbread race. And he said that they would always spend all their time arguing about things that they said were wrong, but they never quite knew how to put it right. But they were still the best of friends. A lot of fun.
Well, Peter, thank you so much. That's been fascinating. Welcome to Hornet Sailing Club. Today I'm joined by Martin Pound, who's a fairly long-standing member of the club, and I'm going to ask him some questions. So Martin, how did you first get into sailing, and at what age and where?
Well, funnily enough, it was very close to here. My father owned a Harrison Butler. It was about 23 feet long, called Trade Wind. And in 1954, he had it here for a few years. There was a spare berth. He had been first lieutenant of Hornet back in 1947. He had had a destroyer to command in the war, and then after the war there wasn't much to do, so they sent him to Hornet. So life sort of began here.
Excellent. So was he on the fast gunboats and stuff, or?
No, he literally was just first lieutenant of the establishment. All he had to do was to drink a gin and tonic in every single MTB that was sat out here and walk off the other end.
Sounds like a good one.
That was peacetime.
And your first experience of sailing in the armed forces, and at what stage of your career and where?
Well, I went to Dartmouth in 1965, and so I did sailing there. We had a divisional Morgan Giles yacht, and when I went back as a sub-lieutenant there for sub-lieutenant courses, I think I was captain of yachts then, and by that time we had a racing boat, a Nicholson 36 called Temeraire. It was not exactly fast by modern day standards. And it had an engine that only went ahead, it didn't go astern. That, interestingly, then in fourth-year courses, because in those days we had 4 years of training, I joined Spirit of Cutty Sark. Spirit of Cutty Sark was Les Williams, Lieutenant Les Williams's boat. Cutty Sark Whiskey had sponsored him for the Ostar in 1966, and he had come third. Eric Taberley won. The boat then became his, and he loaned it to the Royal Navy. And Captain George Vallings, later Admiral, was skipper. Les Williams acted as navigator, and there were 10 of us, and I was 10th hand. So we operated out of Hornet in 1969 and did the Admiral's Cup for that year, ending up with the Fastnet. Well, the 69 Fastnet was very different to the 79 Fastnet. It was very light winds. I remember swimming off the Isles of Scilly as we just were becalmed. It was a gallant 53. And in 1965, when that boat was built, it was the largest glass fibre boat that had ever been built to that stage.
Good grief. Excellent. And the next question I'm coming on to is, and where did that lead to you?
Well, I was then at sea, seemed to find myself navigator of every ship I went to, which was fine. And I bought a little Oysterman 16, which was a little keel boat built in Malpas at the top of the River Fell in around 1978. And at that time I was in Jupiter, and we were in dock for a period in Plymouth. And I remember sailing it down. I brought it down there. At some point I brought it back up here. And then a rather interesting time, because we're now talking about 1979, so I left Hornet, sailed her down. I was slightly tight for time because we were about to go back to sea again in the frigate. I had a Seagull outboard of those days on the back of this little 16-foot. It was a keel boat, very pretty little thing, gaff-rigged. And I set sail at the same time, basically, as the Fastnet race. In fact, just before, because the Fastnet race drifted past me off Portland Bill. This outboard only worked occasionally, but anyway, on this occasion, thankfully, the Seagull started and worked. And I got in that evening to the other side of Lyme Bay, anchored for a few hours in Brixham Harbour. Got going again the next day. And as I came past Salcombe, the visibility had gone. The wind was southeasterly. There was a storm cone flying from Paul Point. A southerly gale was forecast. I thought, well, I really ought to go into Salcombe. And then I thought, well, it's going to be logistically a nightmare. So I kept going. I lost sight of Bolt Tail. Visibility was sort of pretty poor. Not fog, but that sort of mist before a storm. I had an old government magnetic compass that came in a box I'd bought for £1, and that was on the sort of self-draining cockpit floor. And with that, we managed to pick up the Mewstone just at the entrance to Plymouth. It was now pretty windy, big seas running, and I thought, this is too rough to bear off, and so I'll go and beach her at Corsand. I'll just sail up the beach. That'll be much safer than doing anything else. Anyway, as I came past the western entrance, it actually didn't look too bad. So it's just beginning to get dark. It's summer, it's 1979, and I bear away, and I come to a mooring, which I'd borrowed, just by way where Mayflower Marina is now. Rounded up, picked up the buoy, thankfully, all hell let loose, white spume everywhere. The wind suddenly was ferocious, and of course it was the Fastnet disaster. I count myself very lucky. If I was 2 hours later, I could well have ended up somewhere else. Anyway, enough of that story.
Wow. So when did you first sail out of Hornet? In a private boat, an establishment boat, a regimental boat, or with a joint service boat?
Well, again, it was actually with my little 16-foot Petronella. I had gone out to Australia on exchange, so my Falklands War was actually spent on Bondi Beach, getting shouted at by Australians that we'd been very cruel sinking the Belgrano. I then come back and it was due to navigate Illustrious. So I happened to buy my house, which is now 40 years ago, on the other side of Pneumonia Bridge in Rampart Row. And I sailed, I'd left my little 16-footer in the hangar, the helicopter hangar down in Dartmouth while I'd been abroad in Australia. So sailed that up. It now had a little diesel engine in it, I'm glad to say, not the Seagull. So in 1984, I started properly sailing from Hornet.
Uh-huh. And where did that experience take you?
Well, the next few years were very much spent at sea, and then I left the Navy in 1990. They didn't want to promote me any further, and I thought, I'm not very good at office work. So I then taught sailing for 10 years with Hamble School of Yachting and a bit with the UKSA over in Cowes. So that really took me through the next 10 years. So a lot of miles in Sigma 36s and things. Very fortunately, that led over with UKSA, they bought Nuclear Electric and one of the BT Challenge yachts. So I skippered that for 18 months. And that sort of leads me up to about 1999, 2000. And I remember on one occasion I needed to pick up some charts. So I'd berthed on the end of Fieldhouse And on my way home, just to pick up some charts, I met Jeff Goodwin leaning over the rail, looking at the BT Challenge yacht. And I think, anyway, the Navy bought some shortly afterwards, which is very good.
So can you tell us about some of your most memorable sailing events with the service or private racing or cruising?
Well, I think from my point of view, life sort of slightly restarted. I'd had a 23-foot Falmouth workboat for 15 years called Lucy, and had attended the Brest and WRNS festivals and things, and been to Hellevoetsluis in Holland. But it wasn't the most, it had a big open cockpit. It was 23 foot long and weighed 4.5 tons. So it was quite easy to sink. So I decided that I would actually buy a racing boat, and I bought a J92, which is 9.2 meters long. And then I thought, well, I want to sail around UK. So I had to go in 2007, but there was some atrocious weather. And I got as far as the East Coast. And that was a bad summer for everyone. I remember Andy Duport reporting that he'd been stuck in Cherbourg for 11 days. The wind was appalling. It was in July, and Oxford flooded and everything. The following year, I managed to sail around UK, and I realized how much I absolutely loved Scotland. And that led to one of the really exciting times of my life. And from 2009 to 2017, I did the Three Peaks Yacht Race 7 times, and the Scottish Islands Peaks Race 4 times. And those were lovely adventures because it was 2 or 3 weeks to sail the boat single-handed to the start line, which, if one did the Scottish, was from here to Oban. If it was the Three Peaks, then it was Barmouth. And then after the race, or races, then it was a sort of 2 or 3 week cruise to bring the boat back. I don't particularly like going out in bad weather. And if you're single-handed, you do have to... The worst bit was Milford Haven to Falmouth, which is 30 hours, 135 miles. I only sail if I'm going to be able to do it essentially on one tack. And I came to the conclusion in 2017 that was bad enough trying to stay awake. 30 hours, anyway.
And how did you come to own a boat, your own boat?
Well, I think that goes right back to 1978. I sort of decided that I just wanted to have a boat. And in those days, you could get a marine mortgage provided in buying the boat, because it was a new build, provided you could prove that it had a plumbed loo. So I think we had to slightly lie on that one, but anyway, got a marine mortgage and bought. But I suppose I was just always like, you know, sort of like having your own toy.
Mm. And as for Hornet, have you always kept a boat here?
Yes, from 1984, so that was Petronella up to 1990, then Lucy the Falmouth workboat, then the J92 2006 through to 2018. Now I'm in the last stage of owning a boat, and having put it off for about 45 years, I now own a 19-foot shrimper. But it's not too much anti-fouling to do, and it's a good motor sailor.
And can you reflect on how sailing has shaped your life?
Well, it certainly shaped it enormously in the 1990s with the sailing schools. And in fact, it really led me to then the next exciting bit of my life, which was working in Antibes in the south of France and Palma, Mallorca for the next 16 years, just in the winters, but it was just less than 6 months of each year. And it was, as a sailing instructor, I'd also become a motorboat instructor. So it started with doing the yacht master courses down in On-Tee, but that led to actually teaching super yacht crew navigation, seamanship, etc. They have to do courses now, and the nav and radar course was 3 weeks long. Most of the other courses were 5 days. Ship stability, medical, GMDSS. But I stuck to just the seamanship and the navigation. So in a sense, sailing shaped more or less all my life, right from the very early days. My father told me, I don't want you to join the merchant navy if you don't get a pension. Join the navy and you'll get a pension. And I said, what's a pension? He said, don't worry, you'll find out what a pension is in due course. And by the way, when you're at Dartmouth, make sure you get your sailing tickets. You might need them later. And he was quite right.
So you've got your father to thank for your career.
I have, yes.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Martin. That's fascinating.
A pleasure.